name's Andres Ramirez. I'm with people from Mobility Justice. So my colleagues are here with me to help marshal us today. This is part of our Mob J Summer Series, Mobility Justice Summer, here in South Central, right? We want to celebrate this community by riding several corridors. So we've actually ridden on Vermont Avenue, and then Slauson/4th Street, right? And now we're going to be riding on Central Avenue. And the reason we've chosen these corridors, right? One, they're some of the most iconic for this community. But two, there's actual infrastructure projects coming to this community, right? After many years of advocacy by folks like ourselves, right, that ride the streets, there's plans to, embed infrastructure for bicyclists and pedestrians and bus riders on these corridors, right? That's why we're doing this series, kind of initiate this conversation, talk about these infrastructure projects that are coming, that are dope, but also what else is needed, right? Job's not done, right? That's kind of the theme that we've kind of engaged as we've gone around through our community. Is there's still more work to be done. There's so much history to Central Avenue, right? It's one of the oldest streets for this city, right? And it's important that we talk about this story, right? Because it's the story of our community, of our ancestors and stuff, and we want to celebrate that, right? And then we just want to celebrate our community, enjoy the sights, sounds, and smells, right? The amazing food that we're probably gonna pass by. We started here at the Watts Tower. It's one of the most iconic spaces in all of LA. Hidden gem, honestly, right? As you can see, not a lot of people come out to the Watts Towers, right? This was handmade by the resident here in San Rodia in the 1920s, right? So many years ago, 100 years ago. LA is much more than beaches and Hollywood, right? I know that's the picture that likes to be painted to the rest of the world, but it's actually about people here, right? It's actually about a lot of rich culture, unique culture that's unique to our city, and we like to celebrate that. How's the ride so far? Good. Yeah, right, nice and flat. That's one of the beautiful things about Central Avenue. It's nice and flat, no hills, no nothing. Worst part about it is little bumps in the road and the potholes. It's quite a bit, right? It's work to be done on Central Avenue for sure. We got to ride on the first portion of protected bike lane that's south of USC, honestly, right? Which is beautiful. It runs from 95th all the way to Imperial. And you can see it makes a big difference when you have physical separation from the cars, right? It was a big change once the bike lane ended and then we taking the road, right? So just something to note about when riding our community, the need for the infrastructure to continue all the way, right? And we'll see, there's no bike lanes the rest of the way, so we're sharing the road with the community. We're stopping here for a particular reason. So like I said, Central Avenue has a lot of history to it, okay? So right here behind me is what's now the postal office, right? This used to be the site of the Goodyear plant here in Los Angeles. For many years, from like early 1920s to about 1979, this was one of the biggest employers for South Central. Oh, you all right? One of the biggest employers for South Central. Okay, thousands of jobs existed here, tens of thousands of jobs, all right? Union jobs, living wages, people were able to buy houses, send their kids to college and all that. People from this community, right? Eventually, Goodyear decided to move their operations elsewhere, and it created the initiation of the cycle of poverty that's occurred in South Central ever since, right? Almost overnight, tens of thousands of jobs were non-existent, right? You know, double that with the fact that crack was introduced into our communities a couple of years after that. It really was a perfect storm of mental health, over medication, and just, you know, poverty in our community, right? You know, part of that story is this infrastructure that we're riding on, right? The streets are not like this by accident, y'all. If y'all have traveled to any other part of the city, more affluent parts of the city, the streets are well more taken care of. The sidewalks are way more taken care of. The right-of-ways are way more taken care of, right? There is a legacy of racism in Los Angeles, okay? Racist planning in particular, right? In which communities that were deemed communities of color weren't a priority and were disinvested on for decades, right? That's a reality we're trying to change now, right? There is a conversation of talking about, you know, equity, right? Or what I prefer to label as reparations, right? Because that's really what it is, right? This is what we've been living without for too long, right? And it's cost lives. You know, that's the reality about Central Avenue. Central Avenue is known as one of the high injury network corridors in the city of Los Angeles. The Department of Transportation did a study a couple years back identifying some of the more dangerous streets in the city where the highest amount of pedestrian and bicyclist collisions occur. Central Avenue is on that list. There's a reason Central Avenue is being identified as needing that infrastructure to be built, right? And it's calming the traffic. There's no need for this street to be this wide. There's no need for big rigs to be riding on Central Avenue, right? There's a corridor that was identified for that called Alameda. You know what I'm saying? And but it's their lack of regard for the people in this community in which they use these streets as a throwaway, right? Because it's people cutting through this neighborhood. It's not people necessarily who come and, you know, spend their money in this neighborhood, right? Because that's part of it too, right? The economic impact of how we engage with our communities, right? You know, I think it's important that we have this conversation, especially once again with the backdrop of the Olympics coming, right? There's gonna be mad people coming to this community, right? We wanna make sure that people in our community are able to thrive because of it, not displaced, right? Because that's what we don't want. We don't want the streets to be fixed, but then all of a sudden we can't afford to live in our own neighborhood. You know, there's a legacy for that as well, right? It's important that we're open and honest about this conversation, so then we can approach it with an honest and strategic kind of way of making sure that you know, it's for us, by us, right? And that you know, what we fight for, we get to benefit from. Off on 103rd Street, and now we're at 42nd. So we've done 60 blocks about. So this is historic South Central. We're right across the street from the Dunbar Hotel. So we talked about the history of racist planning Los Angeles had. They had a policy called redlining, in which housing was not allowed for people of color past a certain street in this city, right? Central Avenue was that border. People of color couldn't live east of Central, west of Alameda. So a real small portion, all right? Watts was the other community, Pacoima was the other community, Boyle Heights was the other community, all right? This is LA when it was white only can own, you know, a property in Los Angeles, right? Now, of course, black folks have been at the heart of entertainment in this country from day one, right? So this is during that jazz age when these covenants were in most effect, right? So the greatest jazz artists of the time would be invited to Los Angeles to go pay these fancy hotels where they couldn't stay at, right? They could only play there, but they weren't allowed to stay there, right? And so the Somerset family, who were a family that came out from the South, who was successful here economically and invested in real estate, they built this hotel, the Dunbar Hotel. This is where all the most famous jazz artists of the day would stay. Central Avenue became the jazz corridor in Los Angeles. you can imagine back in those days, it was lined up with jazz clubs where these artists will also come in and hang and play, right? And so this is a real cultural gem of South Central Los Angeles in particular. I think part of the story of this community is about resilience, about organizing, but it's about love and power. We really want to uplift that because we don't get these stories in our history books. And we don't get these stories in the LA tours that we get, right? That people get. Those star tours don't make it out here, you know what I mean? But it's important that our community knows these stories, especially folks that are not as connected to it, because it empowers us to know, hey, we came from on the shoulders of giants, right? And we gotta stay up with it as well. This is our last stop before we turn back. This is the African American Firefighting Museum here in Los Angeles. So we're talking about the history of Los Angeles when there was redlining, when our communities could only live in certain parts of town. There could only be one firefighter station that served that community, and that was found here. This station was active all the way until the 1960s. No, 1980s, before it was decommissioned. But the historical significance of its remains has become a museum. When it's open, it's not open today, obviously, right? But you could see the old equipment that the brothers used, the records of all the firefighters from the neighborhood that worked here. It's amazing, an amazing landmark that a lot of people don't even know exists.
I've been here 15 years and I don't know about any of these places you take us to. That's my first time watch too.
Hey, you know what I'm saying? But that's what it's about. We get to know our neighborhood.